We've seen schools have beef, or coaches not get along with each other, or even a combo of those where a coach beefed with one school for half a century. But we've never had one man versus an entire conference. Who could even do such a thing? This video is brought to you by your local Toyota dealers and the Toyota Tacoma. On December 1st, 2008, the University of Tennessee hired themselves a new football coach, Lane Kiffin, a 33-year-old charismatic cannonball who'd rocked the coaching scene. At the University of Southern California under Pete Carroll, Kiffin built a name for himself, becoming co-offensive coordinator of one of the most explosive offenses college football has ever seen. Note, the Kiffin name did have major football ties already thanks to his dad Monty, but his forte was defense. Lane's offenses fueled back-to-back titles, back-to-back Heismans, and he secured the nation's best recruiting classes. That's what Tennessee wanted. Someone who could ignite the program, energize the athletes, current and future, and get the Volunteers back in the SEC title conversation. So, slam dunk hire, right? Well, I'm guessing Tennessee didn't ask Al Davis for a reference. The man who'd made Kiffin the youngest head coach ever hired in NFL history, and the youngest ever fired. That dramatic exit fueled many ill feelings about the fit in Knoxville. This arrogant youngster hadn't been a college head coach before, or any sort of coach in the SEC, and he had zero ties to Tennessee, or even the South. Meanwhile, Phil Fulmer, the guy Kiffin replaced, had maybe too many ties to Tennessee and had brought them the ultimate success. Historically, the SEC was built on smash-mouth, defensive-minded football. Sure, there were great offenses, but the vibe was hard-nosed, gritty, tougher than what Kiffin knew in the Pac-10. So maybe that's why Kiffin started swinging from the jump. He walked into his introductory press conference and immediately took aim at the biggest target in college football, the Florida Gators. As Urban Meyer had his team on the verge of winning its second national championship in 3 years, Kiffin began setting the foundation for our beef. No one was off limits, and Florida in particular was about to find a new enemy. First, Kiffin showed off his recruiting chops as he plucked assistants from nearly every SEC program to round out his staff. He stole LSU's top guy, Ed Orgeron, who Kiffin had worked with at Southern Cal. He snagged assistants from South Carolina, Mississippi State, and Alabama, where he landed his prize catch. Lance Thompson had been Nick Saban's right-hand man since LSU. So when he bolted for Knoxville, Alabama fans figured the only logical reason for defection was a messy one. Coaches changing jobs is part of the business. Nobody would have blinked if Lane had just kept quiet. Instead, he showboated a bit, bragging about hurting his rivals while boosting Tennessee. Those recruiters were a red carpet leading to National Signing Day. First, Kiffin gave credit to his guy for Alabama's top-ranked recruiting class. He celebrated Thompson by taking a swipe at Saban, the man who had already coached an SEC team to a national championship, who torched the conference in 2008, and who came an SEC championship away from likely hoisting a second BCS trophy. That honor went to Meyer and the Gators, as did Kiffin's biggest swing of the day. In his short time with Tennessee, Kiffin proudly swayed high schoolers away from other programs, and maybe no prize was as great as Nikese Richardson. The wide receiver from Pahokee had originally committed to Florida, but once Kiffin swung him to Knoxville, Lane wanted the world to know he'd done it, even after, in his words, Meyer cheated in trying to keep Richardson. On stage, microphones on, cameras rolling, hundreds of fans and boosters in the audience, Kiffin told them that he was about to turn Florida into the NCAA. He claimed that while Richardson was visiting Tennessee, the recruit's phone kept buzzing with Meyer trying to get a hold of him. According to Kiffin, contacting a recruit while he was visiting another school was a big no-no, a cut-and-dry recruiting violation. But hours later, Florida fired back. On behalf of Meyer, they demanded an apology from Kiffin for his allegations, saying he'd been out of line and completely false, which, conveniently for them, the NCAA backed up. Florida committed no violation, Also, the NCAA took a shot at Kiffin for not knowing the rules. I suppose that shot was warranted, considering Lane's accusation of a violation was actually a violation itself. Kiffin apologized, capping off an eventful signing day, and noted that he meant no offense to any of the people he accused of cheating. But that bylaw, and similar ones across other conferences, serve as a governor to coaching beef. It's the expectation that those representing the conference or the NCAA will do so with decorum. But it can also serve as guardrails for our more innovative combatants to operate within. Weeks later, Meyer showed how it's done when pressed on Kiffin's comments. Simple. No energy wasted. He allows everyone else to fill in the blank for how he may have found it. We've ruled out humorous. Good start. Everyone reporting on the matter chose a clear side. Kiffin's brashness flew in the face of expectation, and it wasn't just with fellow coaches that Lane found himself in hot water. That prized receiver he stole from Florida? Kiffin managed to also insult Richardson's high school, leading Pahokie's principal to bar Tennessee assistant coaches from attending football games. Or with a wide receiver he failed to swoon, Kiffin allegedly told Alshon Jeffrey that if Jeffrey went to South Carolina, he'd be pumping gas the rest of his life. That was a shot not just at Jeffrey, but at the entire roster, the entire state, and one of the most powerful men tied to both, Steve Spurrier, the third SEC legend that Kiffin entwined himself with. This pair had actually already traded barbs. In Lane's first week on the job, the Gamecocks head coach questioned whether Kiffin had taken the recruiting test required of new coaches. Spurrier felt like maybe he'd been reaching out to recruits a little early, so he just put it out there. Not an accusation, just a question. Kiffin jumped to defend his honor. I mean, I would too if I nearly aced the thing. Which maybe just means when he did commit violations, Kiffin at least knew he was committing them, like his allegations against Meyer committing violations, which was a violation in itself, or later that same February when he was cited for additional but more harmless violations. We can all agree that fog machines are cool. So just to recount, in his first 3 months, Kiffin insulted recruits, entire states, committed multiple violations, and antagonized 3 extremely accomplished head coaches who have all won national championships while coaching in the SEC. And then Lane had to go hang out with them in person at the conference's spring meetings. Naturally, he brought some jokes. But long before the football would get started, SEC Commissioner Mike Slive had already had enough. Allegedly, he spoke to all the coaches without singling anyone out by name, but his eyes told a much different story. Saban delivered a bless-your-heart-style critique of the young coach finding his way, demonstrating tremendous restraint out of respect to the bylaws. Bobby Petrino from Arkansas introduced a much different energy, clearly having a blast, and being the first to encourage mediation via MMA. The most heated moment came from Kiffin and Spurrier. Earlier in the day, Lane had made it clear that he expected some sort of apology. The head ball coach, though, saw no reason for that, making his point clear in front of the rest of the coaches and reporters there were no accusations, simply questions as to what Lane did or didn't do. And that's how you work around bylaw 10.5.1. By the end of the meetings, it seemed Slive's message had been heard. Kiffin viewed what he'd done as something required of him. Not necessarily ideal, but the efforts were made to move the needle of a program stuck in the mud. Besides, the offseason can leave folks with more time than they know what to do with, so as the actual football approached, their focus could reset. However, there would be consequences for the actions already taken. Ole Miss's head coach, Houston Nutt, painted the clearest picture. Regardless of what coaches said or how they felt, the players are another story. They hang on to all this, and the players at Florida had already circled Tennessee's September visit to the swamp. They plastered Florida's facilities with photos of Kiffin and printouts of his quotes. Even one of the greatest college football players of all time couldn't shy away from it. Tim Tebow would always have his coach's back. And in true Kiffin fashion, when he heard about all this, all he saw was free promotion. But any coach in their right mind would be nervous based on the reports coming from Gainesville. Allegedly, behind closed doors, Meyer was set on running up the score, even pushing for triple digits. Honestly, it wouldn't have been out of character. In 2007, when Florida faced off with Georgia, the Bulldogs scored first and their entire bench sprinted to the end zone to celebrate. A year later, Meyer had not forgotten. He made sure the Gators never let up as they embarrassed Georgia, even calling timeouts in the closing minutes to really let it linger. And no one at Georgia had been calling Meyer a cheater. A beatdown seemed inevitable. Florida entered as the top team in the nation, Tennessee already had one loss, and the Gators were massive 30-point favorites. As everyone watched, rooting for either a blowout or upset, the teams combined for a game that was boring. Florida led the whole way, but Tennessee hung around. And if moral victories exist in college football, for Kiffin, this was it. After all the apparent bluster and overstepping, his unorthodox approach had achieved his goal. Steal the attention, take the pressure off the players, and let them focus on football. And the result turned the tables a bit. Despite winning, Meyer made sure folks know that his team was hit by a flu bug, and then accused Kiffin of not trying to win, of slowing the game down and just running the ball and the clock. But given Tennessee's inexperienced QB, a hostile Gator stadium, and needing to take whatever Florida's defense would give him, Kiffin made the right call. He played SEC football. He also showed that he'd learned all the bylaws, and wondered why the rules didn't also apply to Meyer following the accusations. As the season went on, though, Kiffin laid a little lower. He was still trying to rebuild the program, and the record showed. They did nearly topple the top-ranked Crimson Tide, and earned some major kudos from Saban in the process. For as much as Kiffin seemed to make things about himself, you had to credit his ability to get his team to show up. And they especially did so against South Carolina. This matchup might have been the highlight of the season for Kiffin. Not only did his team play well, but it came in a showdown with a coach Kiffin had great admiration for. Spurrier had put together a blueprint that Kiffin leaned on and made work for him. In a season with plenty of growing pains, Kiffin put a foundation in place for Tennessee to build on. To do so, he publicly feuded with the highest SEC powers, he challenged the conference's expectations of coaches, and he fired up a fan base hungry to return to contention. And it was for those fans that Kiffin saved the final piece of his beef with the conference. On January 11th, 2010, Pete Carroll announced his departure from Southern Cal. Within 24 hours, Lane Kiffin was named the Trojans' next coach. 13 months after showing up in Knoxville, he was gone. Well, he announced he'd be going. Fans on the Tennessee campus did not make it easy for him to leave. They hit the streets, tagging their feelings towards Kiffin on any surface available, burning mattresses, making it so police officers needed to stand by and maintain order. Kiffin and some of his coaches needed to hole up until 4 a.m. before they could make a break for it. Had his abrupt exit been the only issue, Tennessee fans might have forgiven him. Kiffin had no real ties to the school, the state, or the South. But he didn't leave quietly. He took coaches, including top recruiter Ed Orgeron, and on their way to California, they called Tennessee recruits, urging them to skip class the next day so transferring to USC would be easier. On top of that, the NCAA had already announced an investigation on recruiting violations, which ultimately lasted nearly twice as long as Kiffin's tenure in Knoxville. In the end, that became his Tennessee legacy. A decade later, fans still had no reason to forgive or forget. Partially because after 5 years of maturing, learning, and growing, Kiffin made his triumphant return to the SEC, serving as Saban's offensive coordinator. After one national title, he earned another head coaching gig with Florida Atlantic before getting a second crack at running a program in the Southeastern Conference. And boy, just look at how everything can change when given time. Or, okay, maybe not everything. Sorry, Tennessee fans. This beef was a whirlwind. It lasted barely a calendar year. It saw Kiffin rile up an entire conference, got fans so invested that they'd sacrifice their own mattresses in the name of passion, And in the most chaotic way, it began earning Kiffin respect from some of college football's elite. Years later, reflecting on everything, Meyer hadn't forgotten how it began, but did find a friendship that no one could have seen coming in 2009. And as for Kiffin, the spotlight has found him at every stop since Tennessee. And while his perception has certainly changed, in his heart, he'll always be the same guy who took on the entire SEC. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this beef. If you really enjoyed it, I think you might have a good time joining the ranks of our top secret agents, whose names you're seeing on screen right now. They're enjoying our stuff over on Patreon. I think you would like it too. Every Monday we drop something new over there, like this one that you just finished. And honestly, if none of that sounds good, but you're still listening to me for some reason, well, I don't know. Here's some other videos on YouTube that I bet you'll enjoy. We'll see you soon.